Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at the Sacred Meadow Circle Coven.
Okay.
And this is a group that seems to have a very unique approach to Wicca, one that really focuses on self-development and exploring your own individual path.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and we're really lucky because we've got some excerpts from the Sacred Meadow Circle tradition.
Okay.
To give us a little bit of a peek into how the members see things.
All right.
What do you say we dive in and try to understand how this whole thing works?
I'm game if you are.
Okay, so, when you think of covens, you usually think of like a strict hierarchy.
Right. Often.
But the Sacred Meadow Circle seems to be kind of like turning that on its head.
Really?
Yeah, it's almost like they're encouraging you to choose your own adventure, but like for your spiritual journey.
Ah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so they have this really fascinating system of levels of involvement.
Okay.
And you start with folks who are called Theo.
Theo!
Yeah, and essentially they're like non-members.
Non-members?
Okay. They might be invited to observe from outside the circle during rituals.
I see.
Like, think of like a potential member who's kind of getting a feel for things, or even like a guest speaker who's coming in to share their knowledge.
So they're welcome, but not quite in the inner circle yet.
Exactly. And what I find really interesting is that they emphasize this openness to outsiders.
Okay.
While still maintaining this really strong sense of respect and confidentiality for the group.
It sounds like they've got a really good balance going on there.
Yeah, I think so. And then you move on to
Carl.
which are like the members at large.
Okay.
And these are people who identify as witches, and they come to the meetings regularly, and they're comfortable with the group, but they haven't necessarily committed to like the whole tradition.
So it's like a stepping stone.
Exactly. It's like dipping your toes in the water before you kind of like take the plunge.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, not everyone's ready for that full commitment right away.
Exactly. And they even have a term for members who have dedicated in other traditions before they joined.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they call them Seax.
Seax. Okay.
And I think it's really cool how they acknowledge and respect these different paths that people have already taken.
Yeah, it really emphasizes that whole idea of individuality within the group, right?
Exactly.
Like everyone's experiences are valued and they're all seen as contributing something unique.
Absolutely. And then if you decide to dive headfirst into the Sacred Meadow Circle tradition, you become a Giseth.
A Giseth.
Yeah, and these are like the folks who are seen as advisors in the group.
Oh.
They offer guidance based on their experience in the craft. And here's where things get interesting.
Oh.
The sources really emphasize that there's no power dynamic going on here.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, you expect the Giseth to be like the elders in charge, right?
I would think so.
But it sounds more like they're mentors or guides. Even the roles of priest or high priestess are described more as facilitators.
Not authority figures.
Not authority figures.
That's a very different approach.
Very different. And they even encourage like self-dedication and self-initiation.
Wow.
With guidance, of course.
Of course, but still.
It really flips the script on what you typically think of when you hear coven.
It really does make me wonder how that works in practice, though.
Yeah.
Like, how do they maintain that balance of individual exploration within a structured group setting?
That's a great question. Maybe we'll get a little more insight into that when we look at the members' own words later.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how that plays out.
Okay, so speaking of finding your own path.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what it actually takes to become a dedicated Giseth.
All right, let's do it. Well, it seems like it all starts with something they call the challenge.
Okay, the challenge.
Yeah.
Sounds kind of intimidating.
Well, it's not so much like a test or anything. It's more about self-reflection.
Okay.
So it's a 3-part process where potential Giseths are really encouraged to look inward. They kind of have to ask themselves some pretty tough questions.
Like what?
Well, like, is this what I truly want? Can I learn and grow on this path? And am I ready to commit to this life and support others on their journey?
I really like how they frame it as challenging yourself.
Yeah.
Rather than someone else testing you.
Right. It's about personal accountability.
Exactly.
And self-awareness.
Yeah. And it ties back into that theme that we see running through all of their practices.
Yeah. And they even include this great quote from Raymond Buckland.
Oh, yeah.
The founder of Seax Wicca.
Right.
He says, to consider whether Wicca is right for you, you first need to consider whether you are right for Wicca.
It's not just like checking boxes.
Yeah,
you know,
ridiculous.
It's about truly embodying it as a way of life.
Exactly.
So speaking of this way of life, I think it would be really cool to kind of take a step back for a minute.
Okay.
and look at the historical context for all of this.
Yeah, where did it all begin?
Exactly. Like, where did all of this start?
Let's go back in time.
Okay, so let's rewind all the way back.
Okay.
To ancient times, to a belief system called animism.
Animism.
Yeah, this is the idea that everything has a spirit.
Everything.
Yeah, everything. Wind, rivers, mountains, animals.
Wow.
Even concepts like leadership.
So they saw spirits everywhere.
Everywhere. And, you know, we can actually see hints of this in like the archaeological record.
Oh, really?
Think about those ancient cave paintings, you know, with those iconic horned figures.
Right.
Or those little carved figurines.
Okay.
It seems like people have been trying to connect with the spirit world for a really long time.
Yeah, trying to understand those forces at play.
It makes you wonder what those early humans believed.
Yeah. What was their relationship with nature like?
I mean, they probably honored the god of hunting with rituals before going on hunts to ensure their success right.
It makes sense.
And it's interesting how that figure pops up in so many different cultures with different names.
Like who?
Well, like Cernunnos.
Right.
Pan.
Okay.
Even Freya.
Who's often depicted with antlers.
Exactly.
So it's a recurring theme.
Yeah, it's like this shared human fascination with the wild, untamed aspects of nature and the forces at play in the world around us.
Yeah, like this raw power.
Exactly. But, you know, for our Paleolithic ancestors, survival wasn't just about hunting.
Right.
Reproduction was absolutely vital.
To keep the community going.
Both human and animal.
Yeah, so they needed the mother goddess to ensure that continuation of life.
Without her, both people and animals would perish.
Right, and we see her represented in those ancient Venus figures.
With their exaggerated reproductive features.
Exactly, and then as agriculture emerged, her importance only grew.
Like figures like Freya, Demeter, and Isis.
Yeah, they needed those crops to grow to nourish the community.
And as time went on, these early beliefs continued to evolve as humans began to contemplate what happened after death.
What might lie beyond.
Right. Like the Gravettians had really elaborate burial rituals.
Yeah. What kind of rituals?
Well, they would use red ochre, a pigment that symbolizes life and rebirth.
Okay.
And position the deceased in a fetal position, almost like they were returning to the womb of the earth.
The concept of rebirth.
I wonder if dreams played a role in shaping that belief.
How so?
Well, imagine, you know, losing someone you love.
Yeah.
Seeing them lying still as if they were sleeping.
Right.
It's not hard to see how that could lead to the idea that death is a transition, a passing into another world.
The dream world, perhaps.
The dream world, yeah.
It's a beautiful thought.
And as these ideas developed, the god of the hunt took on this new role, embodying that concept of death and rebirth.
So he transformed.
He did figures like Woden, Cernunnos, and Osiris took center stage.
Powerful figure.
Yeah, representing the cyclical nature of life, death, and renewal.
This circle of life woven into their understanding of the world.
And as these religions developed, the spirit world became more intricate. A tapestry of different beings and energies, with the god of the hunt and the mother goddess often occupying the highest positions.
At the top of the pantheon.
But, you know, as societies became more hierarchical, the primary god often represented the rulers.
Sovereignty and nobility.
Like Odin or Jupiter.
Okay.
While the god of the hunt remained connected to the wilder, less controlled aspects of existence.
It's like they needed a way to explain where power came from.
Right, so they put the gods at the top of the pyramid.
Okay.
Reflecting the power structures on Earth.
Interesting how that mirrors society.
Yeah, and, you know, the mother goddess remained incredibly prominent.
Okay.
She was embodied in figures like Frigga and Juno, but her roles became more multifaceted.
In what way?
Well, they were no longer just about fertility and motherhood.
Okay.
But they encompassed a wider range of qualities and domains.
Like what?
Well, think about Thunor, for example. He wasn't just a god of thunder.
Okay.
He represented protection and harvest.
Okay.
Or Woden, who embodied death, wisdom, war, poetry.
So much more.
So much more.
The gods became more complex.
Right, reflecting the growing complexity of human society.
But what about those everyday people?
Well, down at the ground level, the land spirits remained more personal. You know, those rooted in animism, like the elves, Alfar, dryads, nymphs, the fae.
Right.
These weren't necessarily gods, but they were still divine beings.
Each with their own domain and influence.
Exactly. And that belief in the divinity of all things, from the highest gods to the smallest land spirit, that's a core principle in Wicca today.
Recognizing that interconnectedness.
Yes, and the sacredness of the natural world.
But to navigate this complex spirit world, you needed individuals who could understand it.
who could bridge the gap between the human and the divine.
Exactly.
So that's where the shamans, medicine men, druids, and in Saxon times, the Weiss and Wicca came in.
The ones who could tap into that power.
Exactly. They could commune with the spirits and use their knowledge to heal, guide, and protect their communities.
And that's where we get the terms Wicca and witch today.
It's all about acknowledging that connection to nature, the ability to harness its power and work with it in a respectful and balanced way.
But as we know, that power was often misunderstood and demonized.
Right. With the rise of Christianity came the persecution of those who held these beliefs.
Culminating in the witch trials.
That swept across Europe.
It's a dark and tragic chapter.
It really is. But
Yeah.
It's important to remember because it shaped the path that Wicca would take.
It forced those who practiced the craft into hiding.
Shrouding their beliefs in secrecy and fear.
It makes you wonder how things might have been different.
Yeah, if that hadn't happened.
Would Wicca have remained more visible?
Would it have evolved differently?
Questions we can only speculate on.
But one thing is for sure, the seeds of Wicca survived those dark times.
They did.
And eventually they would sprout anew in the modern era.
Speaking of which, I think it's time we move on to the figures who brought Wicca back into the light of day.
Let's talk about Gerald Gardner.
Often called the father of modern Wicca.
So we've got Gerald Gardner, the father of modern Wicca. What made him so influential?
Well, you see, in 1954,
Okay,
after England repealed its last witchcraft law,
right.
Gardner published this book called Witchcraft Today.
Okay, Witchcraft Today.
It was groundbreaking
Why?
because he presented Wicca not as some evil demonic practice,
Right.
but as an ancient nature-based faith.
Like reclaiming the narrative.
Exactly.
That must have been huge. But wasn't there still a lot of secrecy surrounding Wicca at the time?
Yeah, there was.
So how did he navigate that?
It was a challenge for sure.
Yeah.
Because he was bound by that secrecy oath.
Right, the one all coven members take.
Exactly. And it's hard to share a secret society with the world.
Yeah, it kind of defeats the purpose.
But Gardner was clever about it.
How so?
He first published this fictional work called High Magic's Aid,
Okay,
just to kind of test the waters.
to see how people would react.
Yeah, and then once the law was repealed,
Okay.
and he had his coven's consent, he released Witchcraft Today.
As a declaration of this ancient faith.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a bold move.
It really was, and it changed things for Wicca.
In what way?
Well, it sparked a revival of interest in witchcraft and paved the way for its acceptance in modern society.
But there are varying opinions on Gardnerian Wicca, right?
Yeah, there are.
Like even its origins.
Right. Some people argue that he drew from various sources like ceremonial magic and even Aradia, Gospel of the Witches,
Yeah.
to create his own version of Wicca.
I've even heard some people say that he collaborated with Aleister Crowley
Oh, really?
to fabricate the religion.
That's a pretty wild theory.
It is. But isn't the evidence for that pretty weak?
The evidence is very flimsy.
So I guess ultimately the legitimacy of Wicca doesn't really hinge on its historical accuracy.
You got it. It's about the beliefs and practices that resonate with individuals today.
And like we talked about earlier, those beliefs often center on personal experience
Right.
and connection with the divine.
Exactly.
So even if there's debate about the historical details,
Mm-hmm.
Gardner's role in bringing Wicca into the open is undeniable.
Absolutely. Witchcraft Today deserves respect,
Okay.
even from those outside the Gardnerian tradition.
Now, while Gardner's influence was largely felt in England,
Yes.
someone else was about to introduce Wicca to the United States.
Oh, really? Who?
Raymond Buckland.
Oh, yeah. The founder of Seax Wicca.
Exactly.
That's right. He was an English scholar fascinated by the occult.
Okay.
And after reading Gardner's works, he traveled to Scotland to be initiated.
Into the craft.
Yeah, and then he brought Wicca across the pond.
So he was the first person in the U.S. to openly identify as a witch.
That's right. But by this time, Gardnerian Wicca had evolved,
Okay.
leading to new traditions and even some power struggles.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Buckland observed that some traditions had adopted a degree system,
Okay.
similar to the Masons,
Okay.
which created a hierarchy that he felt went against the spirit of Wicca.
So that's why he created Seax Wicca.
To get away from those rigid structures.
He wanted something more egalitarian.
Exactly. He eliminated the ceremonial magic that Gardner had introduced
Okay.
and replaced the Celtic elements with Saxon ones.
And Seax Wicca also abandoned the oath of secrecy, right?
That's right. They embraced the idea of solitary practice.
So it was a pretty radical departure from the traditional Gardnerian approach.
It really was, and it reflected Buckland's belief that Wicca should be accessible to all,
regardless of their ability to join a coven.
Exactly.
And that kind of paved the way for the rise of eclectic Wicca,
which is so prevalent today.
It's interesting how Wicca has branched out over the years.
It really has.
With traditions like Frost Wicca, Alexandrian Wicca, and Pectawida emerging alongside Seax Wicca.
A real blossoming of different paths.
It speaks to the adaptability and evolving nature of the faith.
It does, but it also raises an interesting question.
What's that?
What does it mean to be Wiccan in a world where the practice has become so diverse?
Right, with so many different paths and interpretations, what holds it all together?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And we see many people who identify as Wiccan practicing alone, forging their own paths, and connecting with the divine in ways that resonate with them.
So it's a very personal and individual experience.
It is, and our sources actually touch on this, highlighting how eclecticism can be both a strength and a weakness.
I'm curious about that. How can it be both?
Well, on one hand, it allows for personal expression and exploration. People can tailor their practice to fit their individual beliefs and needs.
Right, makes sense.
But on the other hand, there is a risk of straying too far from the core principles of Wicca.
So it's about finding that balance.
Exactly, finding that balance between individual interpretation and staying true to the essence of the tradition.
And it's a question many faiths grapple with as they evolve and adapt to changing times.
For sure. But one thing's clear.
What's that?
The Wiccan community is more united and open than ever before.
And its legitimacy has been established
through court cases around the world.
We have pagan festivals.
We have guidelines for practicing Wicca in prisons and the military.
It's come a long way from those days of secrecy and persecution.
It really has. It speaks to a growing acceptance of diverse spiritual paths in society.
And that brings us back to the Sacred Meadow Circle Coven.
Full circle.
We've seen how their structure emphasizes personal growth, how they honor individual journeys, and how they value knowledge sharing.
They seem to be navigating that balance between structure and freedom beautifully.
They're taking the best of both worlds.
They offer the support and guidance of a traditional coven, while also creating space for members to explore their own unique paths within the broader framework of Wicca.
It makes you wonder, if you were drawn to the Sacred Meadow Circle, what aspects of your personal development would you focus on?
What resonates most with you from everything we've discussed today?
That's a great question to ponder as you continue your own exploration of Wicca.
And if you're hungry for more, there are tons of resources out there.
From books and websites to podcasts like ours.
That can deepen your understanding of this fascinating and ever-evolving faith.
Remember, the journey is yours to create.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep learning, and keep growing.